Welcome, good morning, Swagatham, Vanakkam. Today, being Maundy Thursday, I thought it would be worthwhile on our part to spend a little time in the morning itself, reflecting on the meaning of that very profound and thematically haunting experience that Jesus so very thoughtfully prepared and provided for as a matter of the continuing education of his disciples. In a sense, it would not be inappropriate to think that the sacramental experience that Jesus provided to his disciples constituted or was meant to constitute the pinnacle of the teaching experience, or from their perspective, the learning experience that Jesus envisaged for them. But unfortunately, this has become a ritual, and what happens to anything that is turned into a ritual is that the external gestures, the actions, the procedure, the ceremonial order, the color, the smell, the setting, all these things assume great importance. And because of our excessive obsession with the paraphernalia of organizing these experiences, we become increasingly blind or indifferent or ignorant of the meaning of the intended meaning of this experience. So today we celebrate the Holy Communion or the Eucharist or the Korbana or the Divya Beli or the Catholic Mass, presumably in commemoration of this very meaningful spiritual experience that Jesus celebrated with the disciples. But if you were to really ask people what is meant by this experience, or what Jesus envisaged on account of it or through it, very likely, you would draw a blank. My memory at this time goes back to a radio program that I happened to hear some 3 years ago, an FM radio program from Trivandrum station. The compeer of the program was a Christian, and therefore her colleagues in the studio asked her to explain to the audience what is meant by the idea or the festival of the Easter. What does Easter mean? Can you please experience to our viewers or our audiences? The young lady was completely taken aback. She did not know what to say. She hemmed and hawed and finally said, "Well, as far as I'm concerned, all I know and all I have known from childhood onwards is the Easter day is the day when we cook and eat appam and stew." So for her, that's the meaning of Easter. Likewise, if anyone were to explain to a secular audience the meaning of this great fellowship meal that Jesus Christ celebrated, I don't know what versions, what interpretations, what exposition of meanings Christians would be willing to offer to any inquisitive non Christian or even a fellow believer. So, therefore, we have to realize that we have become spiritually a bankrupt community because we have discarded meaning from the mechanism of the rituals that we so piously practice. And actually, the Lord's Supper can be a good illustration of the point I've just now made. Now, what is the real meaning of this experience? After all, Jesus was celebrating something that the rabbis of his times were quite wont to or used to doing. It was not at all uncommon in those days for a rabbi to organize an annual fellowship meal with his disciples. So Jesus is cast in the mold, if you like, of a guru, a Jewish rabbi, and he is having this annual experience as per custom, if you like, with his disciples. But then, of course, as we know, in the hands of Jesus Christ, everything undergoes transformation. And what is the nature and scope of that transformation? And that's really where the answer to a question lies. Now, Jesus organizes what, for all practical purposes, is a common experience. It's not a routine experience, but it's a common experience in the sense that it is a done thing. He was not starting a new tradition by way of organizing a fellowship meal for his disciples. But then, what is new? What is radically new? And what is of undying significance is a meaning that he brings into it. And that meaning is the spiritual content of the meal. And what is that meaning? Jesus is saying something pure and simple, something that he's been saying from the very beginning of his public ministry, though this escapes the notice of Christians for reasons that are not entirely known to me. Jesus is saying, look, as far as the world is concerned, the only reality is the visual, the tangible, the perceptible, whatever you can see, smell, touch, etc., etc. But as far as the spiritual person is concerned, the visible is incomplete without the invisible. There's always another dimension which is not immediately apparent or obvious, but which is of crucial importance. It is that other dimension which mostly remains hidden from public view or eye of the common man or the worldly man, that is of critical, decisive importance as far as the spiritual life of a person is concerned. And therefore, as Jesus organizes this fellowship meal, in terms of the physical details, he does what every other Jewish rabbi would have done. But then begins the typically Jesus-like transformation process. He makes it very clear to his disciples that even when they organize or experience something common, they should be able to see that in the light of something uncommon. For example, it was common to have this kind of annual meal. But what is uncommon in it is the realization that this meal can become a symbol of the spiritual greatness, the spiritual uniqueness of human beings. It is, if I were to put it as a general rule, our personality should be developed to such an extent that whatever we touch, whatever we handle, wherever we get involved, we should be able to impart a personal flavor which is quite different from being egotistical, megalomaniacal, or wanting to make oneself the center of the stage. Completely different from that. Let me put it as simply as I can. The fundamental principle of belief in the spiritual world is that when an individual comes into a relationship with God, his personality undergoes a transformation. The essence of the transformation is that the partial becomes complete. And when the personality of a person attains that completeness, the quality of his being in every aspect, the words spoken, the deeds done, the stand taken, the interventions made, every aspect of it, even the moments of silence, will have a very profound significance. It will have a great beneficial impact on all around, even on the inanimate or at least the vegetable animal world around, which is clearly made out in the case of a person like Saint Francis of Assisi, who was the saint of love. So, celebrating a meal with one's disciples can be seen at two levels. One, I have the material means to organize a meal of this kind. I certainly need some means. From a worldly point of view, that's all that matters. That is when, and that is how we turn hospitality into a big burden, particularly on women. But there is another dimension to this experience possible, namely, that what is most important is not the material resources, but the quality of the person. For example, if you were to be invited by a Nobel laureate, you wouldn't accept the invitation merely because you expect a sumptuous meal. You grab that opportunity because you want to be with a great person. So, the real hospitality, according to Jesus Christ, is the hospitality of the person and not the hospitality of material resources, though that's certainly not how it is understood. It is this distinction that is brought out through the contrast between Martha and Mary in that home in Bethany. When Jesus goes there, Martha opens the door for him, but then forgets the guest on account of her obsession, according to the social modes that prevailed then, of practicing hospitality. So the mode of practicing hospitality becomes more important than the personality of the guest who has come. And that's a contradiction which we gloss over. Whereas Mary recognizes that the person who has come is far beyond what all the material resources at her command, or in fact at the command of everybody known to her put together, can account for. And therefore all she can do is to sit like one obsessed, like one spellbound, at the feet of the great master and listen to him. So it is not that you offer hospitality to him, it is that you accept his hospitality even in your own home. That's a sacramental aspect. So there are two kinds of sacramental perspectives. One is a ritualistic sacramental perspective in which we are doing something for the sake of God. The truly spiritual idea of this sacrament is that we accept God's hospitality. We accept Jesus' hospitality. After all, it was Jesus who invited us, abide in me and I in you. And then your life will be fruitful. That is true sacrament. Therefore, the meaning and purpose of sacraments must be understood as clearly and simply as we can. The purpose or the intention of anything sacramental is to bring out the hidden possibilities, the beneficial possibilities from within us. Just as the branches, by abiding in the vine, bring out good fruits, so also we, by abiding in Jesus Christ, should be able to produce good fruits. So the sacramental dimension includes all of this, our abiding in Jesus Christ, Jesus abiding in us, and as a result of which there is an abundant harvest of good produce. Now, when we think of the Maundy Thursday, a day like this, we forget all of this. We think that what's important is this ceremony, and everything about it must be done in the proper manner without making the slightest deviation from the prescribed ceremonial order. It's the order that matters, not the meaning or the mandate. As far as Jesus was concerned, he was exactly the opposite. Therefore, we find him, according to the account that we find in the 13th chapter of John's Gospel, breaking the prevailing code or etiquette of organizing a fellowship meal. He actually shocks his disciples. No Jewish rabbi till date, till the time Jesus celebrated this meal with his disciples, no Jewish rabbi ever took liberties with the proprieties of a ceremonial meal like this, got up from it while it was still in progress, and assumed the garb of a servant and washed the feet of his disciples. In fact, for a Jewish rabbi, it was unthinkable. And from the perspective of their settled Jewish custom, this was the most shocking thing a rabbi could do, washing the feet of his own disciples. And therefore, what Jesus is doing is deliberately disturbing the settled social stereotypes so that people can be liberated from the tyranny of these stereotypes and rendered free to experience and receive something new. What have we done? We have turned into a far more rigid stereotype. There is no question of any disturbance being accommodated within this. And therefore there is no question of anyone learning anything from this. Therefore, there is no question of anyone experiencing this as a profoundly meaningful thing. People go through it in a mechanical fashion. And I don't have to say this to you, that whatever is done in a mechanical fashion has absolutely no impact, no meaning for anyone in the world. So what was meant to be a profoundly meaningful and challenging experience has been degraded by us into a mere mechanical ritual. And I think this is the greatest insult we can manufacture for Jesus Christ. Now, let's stay a little more with this idea of the sacramental view of life and the sacramental personality. Now, as far as a sacramental person is concerned, the hallmark of a sacramental person or personality is that his perspective on any given situation will be different. Not because he wants to be different from other people, but will be necessarily and inevitably different from the outlook of other people. Because he looks at everything from the perspective of God. If you abide in Jesus and Jesus in you, the clear outcome is that you look at everything thereafter through the eyes of Jesus Christ. That's precisely what it means. Therefore, what you see in the given situation, in the given person, in the given issue, will be very different from what it would seem to those who do not have that kind of experience. For example, as found in the second chapter of Mark's Gospel, Jesus is able to sense and read the thoughts within the Pharisees because he is not only the product of the visible but also the invisible. If you have that particular capacity, then you can also look into human beings and find out what kind of thought process is going on there. But more than that, look at any situation that Jesus Christ has handled. In the hands of Jesus Christ, even clay with a little spittle will become a mighty medicine, as in the case of Jesus healing the man born blind. It is not that that particular clay had some rare medicinal power. It is that the person who handled that clay was of such power, such nature, such quality, that even mud becomes medicinal. Or think of Jesus' experience with Satan, who tempts him to turn stones into loaves of bread. And he says, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. In other words, when it comes to eating, you must have a sacramental outlook. Otherwise, there is no problem in transforming stones into bread and eating. In the wilderness, after all, you're not noticed by anyone. You're not violating any law. The problem here is that when you look at food, when you consider the idea of food, you cannot see it purely in terms of your stomach. If you're a child of God, you have to see food in relation to your total personality. That is when the idea as to what you should eat and what you should not eat, what you can and what you cannot eat, and all this becomes redefined when you have a sacramental outlook. Now, unfortunately, the sad situation in our midst is we have been receiving the communion for years and years and decades without coming anywhere near the sacramental personality. The purpose of providing the sacramental experience is to transform us into sacramental personality so that our outlook is changed, our personality is transformed, so that we become the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Now, if you look at those two metaphors, my meaning becomes even clearer. Salt brings out the hidden taste of the dish that is cooked. A dish may be cooked in the most perfect manner according to the best recipe available. But unless and until salt is put into it, you will not have the taste of it. So it brings out something, that additional dimension. It is nothing tangible, but something is brought into action. Same thing with light. When light comes, imagine a room that is full of darkness, completely dark, pitch dark room, and you switch on the light. It reveals something. So that added dimension. That's why Jesus says you're the light of the world. Now, you cannot be the light of the world if you're not a sacramental personality. And therefore, the sacramental experience that Jesus Christ envisages clearly, without any doubt, is clearly meant to transform every believer into a sacramental personality. So that our very presence becomes sacramental. It's not that sacraments are organized in our churches. That's not the hallmark of a faith community. The hallmark of a faithful community is that the community as a whole becomes a sacramental presence in the wider society. Clearly, that is what's meant by Jesus saying, "You are the salt of the earth." He's not saying you're the salt of the Martha Church, you're the salt of the CSI Church, you're the salt of the Catholic Church. You're saying you're the salt of the earth. You're meant to be a sacramental presence in a thoroughly, brutally unsacramental world. Therefore, when Jesus sent his disciples out, he said, "Behold, I sent you like sheep among wolves." Now, that presence, the presence symbolically intuited as a presence of the lamb or sheep among wolves, is meant to transform, or at least to serve as a transformative, potentially transformative influence on the wolves of the society. But all this is completely excluded from the way we understand and practice the Holy Communion, which is a terrible loss. And it's my humble plea with all of us that we wake up to the very profoundly inspiring, unique, matchless spiritual imagination of the Lord Jesus Christ. In taking up what was a conventional practice and transforming it into this unique, profound, matchless sacramental experience. Then he says, "Do this in remembrance of me." The meaning of that section is, if at all you are doing this in remembrance of me, the consequence will inevitably be that those who partake of this will become sacramental personalities. If that is not the outcome, and if after receiving the communion you go back to square one, it's business as usual, then you have not done this in remembrance of me. You have done it simply because of the force of habit, simply because your church authorities prescribe that you should do so, or simply because you think that if you are not seen to be receiving communion regularly and routinely, people will think that there is something wrong with you and you're not a perfect CSI person or Marthama person or what have you. It is completely contrary to what was envisaged of the sacramental experience. Therefore, it means nothing. It means nothing that we celebrate the Lord's Supper. It's actually not the Lord's Supper at all. By no courtesy of consideration can this be in truth and spirit called the Lord's Communion, the Lord's Supper. Let's call it the CSI Supper, the Marthama Supper, the Orthodox Supper, Jacobite Supper, the Catholic Supper, whatever. And that's how we have decided also. That's the reason why the Catholics say, you cannot partake of our supper. It's meant for our children or our grandchildren. We serve the body and blood of Jesus Christ, but that's our supper. Don't come anywhere near it. So we have made it a complete mockery of this. And I'm surprised, I'm shocked that the people who apparently claim to be fervently, followers of Jesus Christ, those who claim to be loyal and faithful to Jesus Christ, those who claim that they are given their hearts to Jesus Christ, remain utterly impervious to this total aberration. I can't think of a worse aberration than this. So as we celebrate, as we commemorate the institution of the Supreme Sacrament, let's spend a little time meditating on what was envisaged to be the meaning of that experience. What's the use of doing something by completely ignoring the meaning, the purpose, and the profundity of it? That's a question I want to leave with you, and I want to thank everyone for your patient attendance. Thank you.